What's good, everyone? My name's Zayas, and today I'm going to be reviewing Solo Leveling by Chugong and Dubu. There was initially another author on here who only worked on Solo Leveling for about a month, but he got quickly booted off due to some controversy. But Chugong, who was the one who wrote the original web novel that this was based off of, and Dubu, who did all the artwork, are the main authors who wrote this. Dubu actually passed away recently, which led me to go back and reread this and review this, but there was also a lot of discussion sparked because of Dubu's death. There's this general idea going around that the manga industry overworks manga authors quite a bit, leading to a lot of them having early deaths or some of them suffering from really bad injuries. Dubu had cerebral hemorrhaging, which could have been caused by tons of different things, maybe just trauma to the head. But at the same time, the manga industry really likes to hide a lot of things about these manga authors. The same could be said for the anime industry. We don't really know a lot about how much these authors are getting paid. We don't know a lot about their contracts, and a lot of the details about their injuries and their passings are kind of hidden from the general public, maybe just so that they don't think worse of the manga industry. This could even be manga authors pushing themselves too far. I know that when Tezuka was on his deathbed and he had one of the most successful careers of a mangaka at the time, all he wanted to do was finish his last work. I can't tell you whether his death was due to some unfortunate natural circumstance or if it was because of the manga industry or slash manhwa industry really just pushing him to put out as many chapters per day. But what I can say is that no matter how good your manga is, no matter how popular it is, no matter how many sales it gets, ultimately it's not worth risking your safety, your health, and your well being for it. People like you and me will see news about mangaka passing away over the internet, and let's say, for example, Miura, and you may be sad for a few days, and you may be upset that you'll never be able to read one of their manga again, but it's so much bigger than that. These people had family members, relatives, loved ones that they'll never be able to see again, and their lives have been cut short by 20, 30, maybe even more years. And all for what? So that the manga industry can make them make a few more chapters a year, or maybe like another 30 chapters a year. Like, it's such a small amount of profit for somebody's literal life. Even if it's not the people in the industry pushing these manga authors to work this hard and get injured and some of them even potentially die, I think it still should be their responsibility to make sure these authors, at least while they're on the job, are practicing safe and responsible practices, because in most normal jobs, the employers are responsible for the safety of their employee as long as they're working. So I don't see why it should be any different here. Those are just my thoughts on the situation. Getting back to the review, this is the first manhwa slash webtoon that I'm reviewing on this channel, and nowadays most manhwa are in webtoon format, even though they used to be in manga format back in the early 2000s. I think this is a pretty fitting place to start because it kind of gives an overview of what the action manhwa scene is kind of like right now. Soul Leveling is a power fantasy with some video game elements. There's tons of series out there like this right now. You can easily think of things like Hardcore Leveling Warrior, Second Life Ranker, So I'm a Spider So What, or The Legendary Moonlight Sculpture, even The Gamer. What I like about Soul Leveling is that even though it's a power fantasy and has a lot of the same pitfalls that a lot of these power fantasies have, it manages to minimize the damages and tries to maximize what it's really good at. And I think what that is mostly the artwork. There's also a pretty decent opening at the start of Soul Leveling. It starts off with some interesting premises. It leaves you a lot to chew on with things like the double dungeon, all these different ranks of hunters, and just a kind of interesting world. There is a decent amount of edginess in the series, and while usually it doesn't really bother me, so I'm just okay with it, there was one scene where it really did bother me, and that was when he decided to execute all these prisoners who had long sentences. And not only is he saying vigilantism is okay, he's also encouraging the death penalty. They kind of made it seem like Sung Jin-woo was the hero for killing these people. Like, are we really trying to go back to the era where we just executed people, like line people up at a guillotine and just chop their necks off one by one? But after 20 to 30 chapters is when the series really starts to pick up and really get good, because the artwork just becomes incredible. The artwork past this point is just amazing. Personally, I do like manga and manhwa with a more creative art style, something less traditional, maybe something like Spirit Fingers a little more. But when it comes to action webtoons, This has to be like a top 3 series in terms of artwork all time. The colors in this series are very bright and dazzling and vibrant. Every color comes through quite cleanly without ever really overpowering you. Personally, my favorite arc in this series was the Demon Castle arc, where he climbed up the castle, and I just loved that yellowish orange hue that was just in the background. Something about it just felt really nostalgic. The character designs in the series were great, both on the enemy side and on the good side. I'd say every single hunter that was A rank and above had something interesting about them just in their designs alone, which made you look forward to what they were going to do in the story. A lot of the enemies in this series look just as good, if not better, than all the characters on the good side. They look like these huge, ferocious beasts that look like they could have came out of a video game. There's a lot of cool tribal theming here too, with enemies being from certain races. I also really like the Shadow Army. I think whenever somebody resurrected, they managed to somehow look even better. Even some of the enemies who you initially think don't look that impressive, like maybe the Monarch of Frost, eventually when it comes to the fight scene, they actually do get a great fight scene. The fights are the main appeal of the series, and they're certainly the best part of the series, with them being super flashy and over the top, but at the same time being very clean. There will be large sweeping attacks in rapid succession, one after the other, yet somehow it's still super easy to follow. And sometimes there's other shots which just look great, like there's panovers of these large armies just waiting to attack. And what I think is really impressive is that Dubu is one of the few authors who really did this type of art justice. Usually, a lot of authors go way too overboard and make things hard to follow, way too many particle effects, and just messy fights in general. So, the artwork is incredible, the starting of the series is decent, but where the series really does start to fall apart is characters. Sung Jin-woo is just so hard to consider a human. He barely shows any human traits, with the only real one being him caring about his family, and even then it feels pretty unnatural. And he never really shows us much of his personality. He never grows as a character. We don't really get to know much about him. He just kind of acts as this omniscient god who just gets to do whatever he wants and gets everything he wants handed to him. One of the worst moments in the series is when Sung Jin-woo is going through this tough battle and he's almost about to lose and he's about to be killed and he just gets teleported away due to his questing. Like, yeah, logically it makes sense, but it just feels like super lazy writing. And after that point, it's kind of hard to believe that Sun Jin-woo will ever really get into trouble again. A lot of power fantasies do this, where they leave their protagonist as generic as possible so that people can self-insert. And while people may think Sung Jin-woo's just like me, really, this guy's nothing like you. This dude's a literal god, okay? And I think that a lot of this really falls on Chugong's hands because he is the one who wrote the story and the characters. But a lot of the web novel industry does like to write like this. So it's just kind of unfortunate that Dubu decided to use his great artwork for this kind of lackluster story. A lot of the other characters, when you start out, you believe that these characters will have something to do in the story, so you're excited. But soon you realize that these characters actually have nothing to do with the story. And Sung Jin-woo literally saves the entire world by himself. Okay, they didn't even move their hands. These characters are mostly there just to gawk on the sideline and just stare in awe and just be like, oh my god, Sung Jin-woo, you're so great. Because otherwise, then nobody could tell how great he is, I guess. Before I go any further, I feel like the game system in Soul Leveling is actually quite a bit better than a lot of the other webtoons out there. A lot of series will get really overcrowded with way too many skills, way too many abilities to keep track of, but it has a very nice, simple, and clean UI where you can tell what's going on and it never really gets too overcomplicated. The game system seemed interesting at first, but the worst part about this was that in the end, the game system didn't even really matter. It was made by some random no-name who was hired by a really powerful being to make this. And at the end of the day, it just feels so disappointing. Like, a lot of the time throughout the series, you're just wondering who created this, what their purpose was, and all that. And then just revealed that this guy just wanted to pass his power on. It just seems like a lackluster ending. So early on in the series, you're kind of excited because you feel like the plot's going somewhere, you feel like the story's going somewhere. But as soon as it gets around to Jeju Island is when things start to get really bad. I think Jeju Island itself was okay, but everything past that was pretty horrible, especially the season 2 stuff. I'm really not a fan when webtoons do season 1, season 2. because the later you go, it just usually gets worse. The problem with Jeju Island was just how it ended for me. It started off pretty interesting with lots of cool characters being introduced, lots of hype action scenes happening, but then the further on you go, you realize it's more of just Sung Jin-woo just stomping everyone who was just introduced and just proving how much better he is than them. At some point, this lore behind the story was sort of just info dumped to us near the end in one long chapter. And I don't like stuff like this. I'd rather experience the story itself. But maybe in this case it was justified because the story was pretty bad. So they might as well just get it out the way so they can show the good fights. And even though the story gets pretty bad near the end and it's mostly just revolving around Sung Jin-woo, I do think that these fights are still quite good in terms of artwork, but it's sometimes hard to get into these fights because you care so little about the story and the characters. I felt especially this way for the Monarch of Dragons. Even though he seemed like a cool character, there was some good fight scenes, it was hard to be interested in the story. The caveat behind all this is that even though this series does have not great story, not great characters, it doesn't really try to focus too much about the characters or the story. It kind of just gets it out of the way, deals with it real quickly, and goes back to the action scenes. So if you can just sort of glance over a little bit the characters being horrible and the story being horrible, which sometimes it's kind of hard to do, you can still enjoy this series despite it being kind of not great in those regards. It also really doesn't try to push a lot of these cringy power fantasy tropes into your face too much, and it really tries to minimize a lot of the horrible parts of power fantasies. I did really enjoy how this series ended early. A lot of webtoons don't do this, especially the popular ones. They'll keep going forever trying to ride out the popularity, and really it just results in a bad story, usually just horrible, messy stuff, like 400, 500, maybe even 1,000 chapters for something that should have ended in 100. And Solo Leveling really doesn't do this. It does overstay its welcome a little bit, but it's not like completely horrible like some of these other series have become. Even if this was maybe just due to his health problems, because there were a lot of hiatuses and maybe he just felt like he had to end it early because of his health problems. But even so, I do enjoy the shortened length in this webtoon. So the first season is pretty decent. It gets a lot worse during the second season, but it's much shorter. And the characters aren't great, the story isn't great, but the author makes it easy for you to not care too much about the story or not focus too much on the characters. And the artwork was incredible all the way throughout, and it was really easy to enjoy. So I think this is like a decent to strong 7. I really hope this wasn't too long. Also, I kind of had to record at 2 different times, so the lighting seems pretty off. Hopefully I can fix that in the editing so it's not too bad. But anyways, thanks for watching the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, whatever. I'll see you in the next one.